All right, so today we're going to have our discussion that is going to be on the Office 365 hybrid deployment and migration. And today being the day one, we're going to actually give an introduction to the entire procedure. And we will be going through the all details of all the parts that we're going to talk today in the upcoming parts. And I'm pretty much sure it can be 3 more parts or 2 more parts required to complete the entire session. Okay. So this is going to be those who are completely new with Office 365, but those who are somebody who already have an experience with Exchange, because we're not going to actually have a basic topics going on which related to the Exchange administration or Exchange migration. So to fully understand what is actually happening in these sessions, I would like you all to have a fair amount of understanding on the technologies that is like Exchange migrations and Exchange administration. All right. So, and yeah, there is the one request is like to keep everybody on the mute. I have not kept the audience in the mute from my end because I find it more good if you have any questions, just unmute it. If you find there could be disturbance going on in the background when you unmute and speak to me, you can put it on the chat, and we all can see the chat, and then we can definitely come back to you with the answer. All right, perfect. So those who are quite new to me, I think pretty much most of you guys know me. So I am Ashwin, and then I work as an infrastructure consultant, and basically has around 8 years of experience in IT industry. And my work involves from primarily technologies like Active Directory, messaging, SCOM, SCCM, virtualization, Office 365, etc. So, and we're going to have a discussion on Office 365, and I got certified in Office 365 some months back, and then I just want to actually probably give up some of the ideas on Office 365 across. So probably if there is somebody who is actually planning to give the certification, that could be used as a baseline to kickstart the study process. All right, so that's all about the introduction. So let's talk about the things that we are going to discuss today. And we're going to have very first discussion is going to be the deployment options. Like what are the options that you should consider or you should find when you are trying to actually deploy an Office 365 messaging infrastructure. Okay, and once the options are ready, we can probably go to the preparation phase of it, and then we can talk about an Microsoft Online Services directory synchronization tool. Then we can talk about the mail routing, and we can talk about the multiple migration methods and tools. And I want to give you an idea that today is going to be 100% introduction to all these. Once we are aware of all these different options that we have, then we should be going ahead and then getting on to multiple parts of these sessions in more details. Like we'll have a different session talking about DIRSync. That's the other name that is for Microsoft Online Services Directory Synchronization Tool. Then we can have a specific sessions that is going on of the migration methods and tools. And with today's session, you'll get a fair amount of understanding what you should be learning to actually be an Office 365 consultant. All right, so that's all about the agenda, and then let's move on to the email deployment options. The very first thing I want to ask everybody is, when you talk about cloud, I mean Office 365, it's Microsoft Cloud for Exchange or SharePoint or Link. So when you talk about Exchange Online, that's when the Office 365 for Exchange comes in picture. Okay, so whenever we talk about an Office 365, that's what is Exchange Online. I just want to make everybody sure that we're not actually getting confused with the Exchange Online and Office 365. That's both the same. Okay, and so whenever we talk about deploying our services on cloud, there could be two things in our mind. That is, we have a hybrid option. That is, we have services running on our server that is running on the premises, as well as some of the service that is running on the cloud. All right. So the other option is going to be we move everything to cloud. I mean, every service is going to run on the cloud. So that's the two possible options that you find. And that is the hybrid deployment is an option when you're going to have the mailboxes that is going to have both on premises and on the cloud. Okay, so you have two organizations basically administering the same Exchange mailboxes or Exchange organization. I can say, let's say it this way. Suppose you have 50 users. You could have 10 users running on the cloud and the rest 40 users running on your on-premises systems. I mean, you might have your Exchange servers running, and that might be having the other 40. And there could be other possibilities as well. Possibilities are there. Your archive mailbox is in the cloud, and your primary mailbox is in your on-premise. So that's all quite a lot of possibility in actually a hybrid deployment. So whenever you talk about a hybrid, you can probably come across and say that's a scenario where you're going to have an Exchange mailbox that is spread across the cloud as well as in your on-premises network. And the other option is going to be every mailbox is moved to cloud. So you do not have anything running on your on-premises network. It's like almost every mailbox or every dependent things are moved to cloud. So you will be 100% dependent on the cloud, and then there is no dependency whatsoever on your on-premises network. Okay. So moving things to cloud is not going to be a one-day task. Based on it all depends on the how big is your network and the number of users that we have. It could be a migration process that is running for months, for days, or even actually for like quite a long amount of time. Even actually a good amount of manpower is involved in actually doing the migration. Okay, so let's just go ahead and then have a few things which we need to consider whenever we are actually preparing to deploy an Exchange Online. But I want to actually ask you one thing. Are we all very good with the options that we have whenever we are going to deploy an Office 365? I mean, there's only two options. Either you move everything to cloud, or if you keep some in your on-premises and some to cloud, right? I mean, so that's when you have things running on both the side, and that's when we have a hybrid scenario. And so that's basically it. I mean, it's not something rocket science. It's just two options that you have. Either use cloud along with your on-premises, or else just use cloud. All right. So, are we all good with that? I think yes. And we probably will go with the things that we should consider whenever we are going to actually deploy an Office 365 or Exchange Online. What are they? I mean, one thing is going to be the identity management. Okay, we should be understanding what is that, and then what the differences it makes, and what are the things that you should consider for the identity management point of view. And then we should be having a fair amount of understanding on Microsoft Online Services Directory Synchronization tool, and we should have a good amount of understanding on the mail routing and the migration methods and tools. All right, so I just want to actually ask everybody a simple question, like, what do you mean by an identity management? What do we think that? It's managing the credentials of the users, like the users' authentications requirements. Do you think that will be the case? Like, and how would you identify the user who is going to connect to cloud? So here there is only two things. One is going to be a non-federated identity, and the other one is going to be a federated identity or a single sign-on. What do you mean by non-federated identity? Basically here, it's not just a cloud. Think about it this way. You have two different organizations running in two different Active Directory forests, and Forest 1 have one set of credentials and Forest 2 have another set of credentials. And whenever you access the resources that are there in the Forest 2, if you are actually prompted for a credential that is for the Forest 2, which means this way, the credentials that you have in the Forest 1 is not going to be useful to connect to the Forest 2 resources. So you basically have two sets of credentials. Whenever you're connecting to a resource in the Forest 1, you connect using the credentials that you have in the Forest 1, and whenever you go to the Forest 2, you will be prompted for another authentication, and then you give that username and password. So you have multiple username and password. And the same scenario here. If you have a non-federated identity, which means you have different set of username and password for your Exchange Online, and a different set of username and password for your on-premises network. All right, so your cloud credentials will be different. And whenever you access the cloud-related resources, you have to provide a cloud-generated credential. All right. I think Samir have some question. I probably believe you can actually ping me if you have some difficulty getting through me. All right, once you type it, I'll come back to you on that. Okay, so what are we talking about? The non-federated identity means all the users in the mailbox, with mailbox in the cloud, will have an Office 365 generated credentials. Your session was disconnected. That's fine. I mean, if your session is disconnected, it should not be a huge issue because the whole session is recorded and will be available in the I will probably get you the link how to get through the recorded sessions later on once the session completes. So that should not be an issue. If you miss something somewhere, you will still have an option to go ahead and review the same. All right. Perfect. So see, so that was the question from Samir. So, all right. So that's what I want to talk about is we can have two things. There are a few questions that people come across is, and that is going to be this way. Whenever you have two networks, that is an Active Directory that is running on your on-premises and you should have an Active Directory that is running on the cloud network that is maintained by Microsoft. So do we have an option to synchronize these two directories? Like whenever you create a username or a user details or a username on your Active Directory that is on your on-premises, do you have an option so that it is automatically made on the cloud? And that is possible. Okay, so you can probably do yeah, hi Kedar, I think you probably should be muting the phone. I just muted him. Okay, all right. So that's just a request to all. Make sure that if there's nothing to speak about, make sure that you are actually on mute, so that that causes no disturbance to anybody across the session. All right. So so that's one thing which I want to talk about is directory synchronization. That is, if you have a directory that is running on your on-premises network, that is AD, running on your on-premises, you do have an option to sync them. Wait a second, I think somebody just joined. Let me actually admit him. Okay. And this is something which I want to say. Even if you actually do a synchronization with the Active Directory, your credentials are still generated and managed by Office 365 Cloud, which means just keeping a directory synchronization doesn't mean that you have a single sign-on or a federated identity. You still will have a non-federated identity. All right. The only difference here is going to be whenever you make a user account on your Active Directory, on-premises Active Directories environment, it automatically gets created. That's it. It's still going to have its own username and password. All right. So that's something which I actually mentioned in the third line. That is, if you have an on-premises identity management system such as Active Directory, user will have a set of credentials for their Office 365 resources and a set of credentials for their on-premises resources. All right. So what is the advantage of using a non-federated identity? The advantage of using a non-federated identity is going to be we have very less overhead in deploying or setting up or maintaining an identity solution on your premises. But that's going to be there. It comes with a disadvantage as well, and that's going to be simple as this. Like say, you're going to have like say this way. The user experience is going to be probably it's not going to be a seamless connections between them. Like whenever they are actually getting connected to an Office 365 environment, they will be prompted for a credential. And unless there is an education or unless there is a training provided to the users, the user will not be good enough to understand which username and password to use and where. So that's one disadvantage that you may find when you use a non-federated identity solution. That is, the user experience is not going to be that great, and you might need more user education about the credential management. Like you should be probably doing some updates saying that whenever you actually open an Outlook and it actually prompts for a credential, you make sure that you give the Office 365 credential. And whenever you are accessing a file share that is inside the same network, you probably should use your internal AD credential. All right. So I think that's probably fairly straightforward. Non-federated identity. It means you have two different set of credentials. One an Office 365 generated credential, and other one is your on-premises identity management credential. Like say if you have an AD running on your on-premises, you will probably have another set of username and password there. All right, and I think for a bigger organization with many users, it's not a recommended option to use a non-federated identity, because this is something which we are all aware of. Like say, many of the reasons for the users to call help desk is, if you look at the statistics, is like they don't remember the password. And when you have many credentials to remember, there is possibilities that you may forget one of them. So they may end up actually calling the help desk, and then the help desk has to reset them. So, but if you have a central credentials that is even actually available to cloud, probably these things can be avoided. So yeah, there are advantages as well, because you don't need a identity management solution on your own premises, and even actually you do not have a burden of installing and maintaining an identity solution again. All right. Our ADFS will help, and that's, yes, definitely, that's where we are going to talk about that in the federated identity or a single sign-on. When we say like the two options of identity management, the one is the non-federated one, which means there we do not have an ADFS running on your premises, so it's like a two set of credential. Right, we will talk about that in the next slide. All right, so what do you mean by single sign-on? Single sign-on or federated identity means all the users with the mailbox in the cloud can use the existing on-premises Active Directory credential. So the existing on-premises Active Directory credentials can be used to access both the cloud as well as the on-premises resources. And how do you do that? This is going to be done by installing an ADFS system on your on-premises organization. And that's the about the question Charles asked, the ADFS requirement. Yes, if you want a federated identity, you need to install this on your on-premises organization. And if you remember in the last slide, I talked about the advantage of non-federated identities. You have less overhead because you don't have to install an ADFS. So you don't need an administrator to maintain an ADFS server on your organization. And if you ask me, definitely if you need a better experience between for the users, and users who need to use the same credential, then you should have an ADFS running on your on-premises network. All right. There are a few things which I want to talk about. Is this is not related to cloud, but earlier days when we talk about an Exchange administrator, we used to be more or less limited to Exchange and AD from 2000, but otherwise just Exchange or the Exchange database and all sort of things. Okay, wait, let me actually see what is the question thing. Oh, there was nothing. Okay. Oh yeah, somebody is actually waiting to get connected. All right. All right, just accepted. All right. So what I was saying is there was a question that is non-federated identity Office 365 login password, no expiration notification. Okay. See, these things are all maintained by the ADFS, and this is something which we can discuss in more details whenever we are talking about ADFS or in more details. Definitely, the ADFS is going to manage your sessions to your Office 365. Like say, you're going to actually use your credentials that is there on your on-premises, and you're going to actually get connected to the cloud using a cloud credential. So how do we set up the Office 365 details on ADFS? It's something that we need to have a more detailed discussion in the upcoming parts, but that's something that we do in the ADFS, so it should not be an issue at all. All right. And okay, so what I need to ask about is going to be like this. The single sign-on option is actually made when you actually install an ADFS on your organization and get it going. So what I was actually talking just now was the earlier days we used to be well sufficient enough with just knowing Exchange, and this is something that is changing today. That today the things are getting more complicated, and more things are getting integrated together. So it could be more or less possible that an Exchange administrator is expected to know more about Active Directory. I mean, AD definitely. I mean, that is a primary requirement. And there another one is like going to be an ADFS, the Federation services, the certification service, and the other few things are like the forefront. So to be a complete Exchange administrator nowadays, you should be aware of these technologies, because whenever you look into an Exchange org, you get across these things in many ways. So that's something which we probably need to have more understanding on. And so when we actually talk about the advantage of using a single sign-on, I think it's very simple. You don't need to use different set of credentials. And I think this is the answer to Samir again. The policy control. Administrator can control the account policy using Active Directory, which gives the administrator the ability to manage password policies, or workstation requests, restrictions, etc. So what will be the licensing cost? It depends on the just a moment. It 100% depends on what all plan that you want. There are multiple plans involved in Office 365, ranging from $4 per user per month all the way up to $20 per user per month. So it depends on what plan you choose. Probably I can share across the licensing plan probably, and that will have the options that are available, and then depends on the options that you need. It ranges from $4 all the way up to $20. So, all right. So that's going to be per month per user. All right. And the other, okay. So we can actually this is something which we have more or less going to be we have more control whenever you have a single sign-on option. That is, you have a policy to control the password requirements. You can actually do an access control. You can do a lot of things, like say, suppose this is something which I actually talked in the beginning. The majority of the calls that an IT help desk gets is actually forget password. And that's a common thing that happens because you have too many passwords to remember. And if you have few passwords to remember, that's going to be less likely to happen. So you may end up having a reduced support call. And the other thing is going to be the security point of view. You have a better security level when you are using ADFS. You can use a lot of options, like say dual factor authentication. So you have better security. If you want a dual factor authentication, you can use that. All right. And what is the disadvantage? Single sign-on requires new service to be installed, which means more cost. And so that's the main disadvantage somebody can look at this point. Why would somebody won't go with a single sign-on option? Because you need servers that are running with an ADFS on your premises, which needs extra server, extra license, and basically extra cost. All right, so I think that's all about the two different identity management that you have with Office 365. But there is it is going to be a recommended option to use single sign-on, but this is something which we need to think about. Is it's not a requirement. It is just a recommendation. If you want to go with it, you can go with it. If you don't want that, it's fine. And suppose say you're going to do a migration to Office 365, and suppose you have like 30,000 users. So you're not going to actually migrate all 30,000 in a day. So in that case, what is going to happen is you may have a scenario wherein you have a coexistence scenario, where you have both your on-premises as well as your Office 365 running. And in that case, it's better to actually use a single sign-on so that the users are not going to be confused with the how the connections can be and what are the credentials that they should be aware of. All right. And again, as I said, it is not a requirement. It's just a recommendation. So that should answer to, I mean, I probably don't think that as a question. Maybe that is just an information that Charles wants to update. Yes, the organizations without AD can still use Office 365. I mean, because that's not a requirement. It's just a recommendations that you can probably think about. Okay. And there are a few things which you should understand before even taking a call, whether you should go with a single sign-on. Is single sign-on is possible with ADFS, first of all. That's one thing. But that's going to require an Active Directory on premises. So first of all, you should make sure that you have an Active Directory in place on your on-premises network. And if you are actually willing to go forward to invest on ADFS, then you probably are fine to move on with a single sign-on. Okay. So it's not just the ADFS. Single sign-on requires you to install and run Microsoft Online Services Directory Synchronization tool. So that's the second component involved. We were just actually talking about ADFS in the last slide, like, you need a server running with ADFS. So yes, you need one more thing, and that is going to be a Microsoft Online Services Directory Synchronization tool, or you can actually call it as DIRSync. So that's something that you need to have on your premises. Okay. Now there is another thing. If you deploy an ADFS and a DIRSync or a directory synchronization, then you have to perform a staged Exchange migration. Basically, a cutover migration is not possible. Detailed differences will be talked in the later on stage, but I can give you an idea of what I'm talking about: a staged Exchange migration and a cutover Exchange migration. Staged Exchange migration is going to be like this way. You're going to migrate your Exchange organization in different batches. Like, so you will migrate today 100 users, tomorrow another set of 100 users, and so forth. Cutover migration means you're going to migrate everybody at one shot. So if you're using ADFS and directory synchronization, you probably need to make sure that you're using a staged Exchange migration and not a cutover migration. All right. We will be talking about this in better details in the upcoming slides, and we will be talking about this in more details. Definitely, we'll be seeing all these in a high-level overview of all sort of things today. We can have a better idea on this in the upcoming parts, probably in the coming weeks, like how to do the migrations and all those things. All right. So I think at least we are actually clear about the identity management part of it. The reason is, if you look at the earlier slide which we talked about, is whenever you're actually preparing to deploy an exchange online, the very first thing to consider is going to be the identity management. How are you going to manage your identity? Do you want a different set of credentials for Office 365, or do you want to use the same on-premises credential to access your Office 365? All right, so that's what we just discussed. If you want to actually use the same on-premises on-premises credential for Office 365, then we need to actually consider deploying an ADFS and DirSync, or Microsoft Online Services Directory Synchronization tool. All right. So the next part we need to actually come across is going to be what is basically DirSync. All right. So probably DirSync is something. If you ask me to list out the primary usage of DirSync, it's going to be to synchronize the global address list. Okay, and it can support complex routing scenarios, and it is something that is useful to provision users in a cross-premises deployment. What do you mean by that? Synchronize the GAL, which means it is going to synchronize the users that are there in your on-premises network and the users that are there on the Office 365, and show you a single GAL. So it means if there is somebody sitting in the Office 365 environment trying to send an email, he can probably is going to send an email to a person that is in the on-premises end. He can simply use a GAL to get his user email address and then send it across. So there is we are not going to have two different GALs, like one for on-premises and one for the Office 365. So we're going to have a GAL synchronization using this DirSync tool, and we can actually have a better routing scenarios, which we will be having a better understanding when we talk about mail routing in the upcoming session. This tool can help you with it can be used as a supporting tool whenever you have a complex routing scenarios. And the other thing is going to be provisioning users in a cross-premises deployment. What do you mean by that? Like whenever you create a user in your AD with a mailbox, or that provisioning is automatically done on the Office 365, which means you don't have to create users in two locations. Like the DirSync is going to take care of provisioning the users that are there on your AD. All right. Now, basically, the DirSync is the only option that you should be using when you are trying to synchronize with a Microsoft Office 365 directory, basically. And I'm not saying there is no third party to do a synchronization, but I'm talking about a DirSync or directory synchronization to a Microsoft Online Active Directory. So there could be possibilities that there are a lot of third-party tools that will help you to synchronize two different forests. Like as long as that is not a Microsoft Online on the other end, you can use them. But if it is a Microsoft Online, you have to use DirSync, and it is not licensed. It is not something that you have to buy from Microsoft. It is something the tool can be downloaded. All right, so that should be it. Okay. So the other thing which we need to understand is about the dir synchronization is it is actually a one-way synchronization by default. Whenever by default when you install the DirSync our directory synchronization tool. It is going to synchronize your on-premises directory to cloud directory. Okay. And there is one more thing. Many of the cases that you may have scenarios wherein you're archiving mailboxes on cloud. All right. I mean, you're archiving mailboxes on cloud, and your primary mailbox is in your on-premises network. And when you might be having scenarios wherein you want to move mailbox from your cloud to on-premises. All right. And there could be scenarios that you need to actually synchronize the save sender and block list from the cloud users as well. And suppose you want to actually synchronize a voicemail notification. If you want to do these synchronizations, and if you see this, the source is actually at this point is cloud. So which means if you want to actually do the other way around, like say if you want to actually synchronize the data from cloud to your on-premises network, you need to make sure that you have right access to the directory synchronization tool on your AD. All right, which means your directory synchronization tool should have a right access to your AD on-premises AD server if you want these things to happen. All right, and this is not actually used or required for everyone. If you ask me, not everybody is going to have a primary on-premises and an archiving on the cloud. So these are going to be you only need to provide this rights. You only need to provide the right access to directory synchronization tool on your on-premises AD if you want to do the following, which I said. Like say you want to archive your on-premises mailbox to cloud, you want to move the mailbox from cloud to on-premises, and you want to synchronize the user-managed save sender and blocked sender list from the cloud, and you want to actually synchronize the voicemail notification from cloud. All right. I mean, if you don't have these requirements, you don't need that permission. But if you have these, you want to make sure that it is there. So there is one more thing which you need to understand. If you are trying to do a hybrid deployment, or if you are trying to do a single sign-on, or if you're trying to do a staged exchange migration, then the directory synchronization is mandatory. Okay, what do you mean by a hybrid deployment? Which means a part of your mailboxes are on cloud and part of them are on-premises. And single sign-on, we just talked to some time back, like you want to use your on-premises credentials to log into Office 365. And we just gave an understanding what is staged migration. That is, we migrate by batch by batch. If these are there in your requirement list, you need to have your sync. I mean, that's it. There's no other option. So the other thing is going to be the main important part is mail routing. I mean, this is something which we probably might have in our mind. Say half of the users are on cloud, half of them are on Exchange. So how is the mail routing going to be? So this is something. Generally, I'm speaking. It is not exactly always. When you have a hybrid deployment, your MX record will be pointing to your on-premises Exchange as your authoritative domain, and then the basically what is happening is, if there is any email that is going to cloud, it's going to be relayed through your on-premises network. It is not always required. You can even configure the routing through the other way. Like say the email comes to cloud and then it comes to our site. All right. But the by default or the general deployments is actually the other way. Like the email will come to your end first, and then comes to Exchange in the and then comes to Exchange online. So you can actually talk about it this way. You point your MX record to Exchange on-premises server, and you have relaying set on that, and it is going to relay it to Exchange online. All right. There is few things which you need to understand is whenever you're doing a migration, okay, this is one question people ask. What about mail routing when I'm doing the migration? Like say I start the migration and the user mailbox is getting migrated right now. What happens to the emails that is happening at the point of migration? And that's actually very simple, because whenever you do either a cutover migration or else a staged migration, you are going to still synchronize the emails. So how is that going to happen? The cutover migration is going to use subscriptions to basically synchronize. It's going to still copy the content across the on-premises and the Office 365 until the migration is completed. And when you're doing a staged migration, whatever is actually happening is whatever email that you get on your on-premises mailbox, before starting the migration, there is a target address that is set on the on-premises mailbox. So whenever an email comes to your on-premises, that looks at that and say, oh, target address, oh, cloud, oh, let's go to cloud. So which means even when the migration is going on, it actually stamps the cloud target address on your on-premises network, on-premises mailbox, to be exact. Okay. Does this make sense? I think the mail routing part of it, you're still going to have the mail routing in place. The very first thing that you should understand is how the mail routing happens. It can be either through your on-premises and relayed through to cloud. And what happens to the mail routing when you're migrating? It's still sync. During a staged migration, you're going to use a target address target address is going to be stamped on your on-premises mailbox so that the emails are still forwarded or sent to cloud while the migration are happening. And even after the migration, so I could say this way, even after the migration, when an email lands on your on-premises, because the Active Directory attributes have the target address set, it will still come to your on-premises mailbox. Sorry, because the Active Directory has got the target address stamped on the on-premises mailbox, it will still come to your cloud mailbox. All right, I think that's fairly simple to understand the mail routing. So this is something which you should way much critical to understand. Whenever you're doing a migration, make sure that your on-premises mailbox has got the target address set, and that is set to cloud. All right. If you don't have that set, then you're going to have the trouble in actually mail routing. All right. So that should be the main thing, and that should be one of the main things that you should look when you are finding trouble routing the email between the cloud and the on-premises. I think probably Charles has got a question to ask. How about Exchange without on-premises? Okay. In that case, it's very simple. The email straight away comes to your cloud. Simple as that. Your MX record will be pointing to cloud. So when somebody sends an email, the MX comes to cloud. Simple as that. So there's no routing in place. It's just email comes to cloud straight away. So there's no real routing between on-premises. I mean, there's no on-premises, first of all. Oh yeah, definitely. Yes, exactly. This is something which I'm trying to say. The target address is going to be something which is required on your on-premises mailbox. I mean, it is not exactly Exchange, which means the on-premises mail structure should have a target address set. That's simple as that. It can be a Lotus Notes, it can be an Exchange, it can be any other thing. And I think we should have a very fair amount of discussion that is going to be the next part of the slide. What at one condition you should use a staged migration, and what condition you should use the cutover migration. So definitely we'll have a better understanding on those actually. So this is something which I want to say. This is very critical. Your target address, that is the cloud target address, should be stamped on your on-premises mailbox. I mean, it's not necessary it is an Exchange. It can be Exchange, it can be Lotus Notes as well. I mean, it can be anything. I mean, it can be anything that understands target address attribute, simple as that. The only difference is Exchange might use a different attribute to set the target address, and possibilities are there. It is something different with the other mailing servers. So it all depends on what mailing server that you're using. But you need to make sure that the target address is set. I think that's probably this is one of the important things that everybody should understand whenever you're trying to do a migration, and that is actually target address. And if you have it set right, you should not have any trouble in actually routing the email. All right. So let us go to the next slide. Okay, migration methods. What are the possible options to migrate to Office 365? You can use mail move request, all right, and either you can use a cut over migration. You mean it's going to be all of a sudden you change every users from your on-premises to cloud, and you might do a staged migration, and you might require to use an IMAP email migration. You might require to use a PST Capture options, and you might need to use third-party solutions. And we can actually talk about the managing the migration batches on an Exchange Online and sending a welcome message to new user. And that's the last part of the thing. And today we're not going to discuss about the last two things, managing the migration batches in the Exchange Online and sending a welcome message. We will have a introduction overview until the third-party solution. And the reason being that is because unless there is a migration topic that is taken in details, that will make no sense to actually talk about the batches and all those things. So sending the welcome message should be the last thing. I mean, whenever we are done with every part of this Office 365, the last part we should actually say, okay, now we are moved, so let's send a welcome message. And so let's see each and every migration possibilities one by one. And this is move request. I mean, I'm pretty much sure most of the Exchange administrators are aware of move request. The move request is actually basically there is something called Mailbox Replication Service that is running on a client access server that is responsible to do mailbox move, and that is responsible even if you're doing an import or export of PST file, and if you're trying to actually restore it, deleted or soft deleted mailboxes. So this is something which is basically an Exchange administration point of view. The service that is Exchange Mailbox Replication Service, MRS is the other way we call it. It is responsible for mailbox move. It is responsible to import and export PST. It is responsible to restore a disabled or a soft deleted mailboxes. So that should be our primary thing to focus. If you're trying to do a move request, make sure that your client access server and the MRS is all up and good. Okay. And when will you do a move request? Move request requires you to have a hybrid deployment. I just want to actually ask one question. I mean, it's not necessary that you have to answer it. Move requests require hybrid deployment. And I just want to know, what are the things that you need to require if you're trying to do a hybrid deployment? Do you need a directory synchronization tool? Do you need a single sign-on? Do you need a ADFS? what is required when you're trying to do a hybrid deployment? Probably, I think many could be right actually, because we talked about this in the beginning. That is the hybrid deployment. If you're trying to do a hybrid deployment, you kind of require DIRSing as well. So it's not necessary that you need an ADFS. So please keep that in mind. Like say, you don't necessarily need an ADFS to do a hybrid deployment, but you need a DIRSing. So you need to make sure that the identity manager is not exactly required. That is a recommended option, but not a requirement to do a hybrid deployment. The only good part when you have an identity management is, or if you see a single sign-on option is, or ADFS installed is, you have one credential set, and that's not actually a requirement to do a move request. So, but if you want to do a mailbox migration using move request, you require to have a hybrid deployment, which means you need to make sure that your DIRSing is in place and your Active Directory is getting synchronized with your Office 365 AD. I think, does it make sense? All right. So I think the other thing which you should understand is, when you have a move request, what do you mean by move request? You can actually move a mailbox from Office 365 to on-premises, and you can even move it from on-premises to Office 365. And there is one thing we should understand. We just spoke about that some time back. If you're trying to do a migration from Office 365 to on-premises, then you probably should be making sure that the DIRSing has got enough permissions on AD as well. All right. So if you want to do that, you can actually use Exchange Management Console or Exchange ECP if it is 2010, or if you whatever it is, you want to actually use it, or if you want to use the Office 365 console. All right. It depends on the version. If you're using an Exchange version that is actually having an ECP like a 2013 or any of those versions, actually, you rather should be using Exchange Management Console if you want to put this move request via GUI, and you can even have an option to create move request using the shell. So it's your opinion how to do that. All right. And there is the other thing is the second type of migration is going to be the cutover migration. The name itself says you're going to migrate the entire mailbox that is there in your organization in one single operation to cloud. Okay. So this is an option that you can use if you have less than 1,000 mailbox. Probably if you have more than 1,000 mailboxes, this is not a recommended option. You should rather not use this. Okay. And how do you do that? You should be rather using an Exchange Control Panel email migration tool to actually do that. And then either that's one way of doing it. And there are a few things which you should understand is the cutover migration supports 2003 or later. Okay, if you're running an older version of Exchange, and probably the case definitely when you're trying to move it, if it is other than 2007 or 10. So if you are running on an Exchange that is not 2003, or if you're running on something which is not even 2000 Exchange at all, you should either use an IMAP email migration or a third-party solution. All right. So this is something which you should be have it in mind, like whenever you're trying to do a migration, what is the current version of Exchange? Depending on that, you should be deciding whether to use an IMAP or cutover or a staged migration or a migration using MRS. Okay. And it is actually saying that if you have more than 1,000, consider using staged Exchange migration. All right. And there is few things which I actually talked about this in the beginning itself. If you're trying to use a single sign-on, you can't use cutover migration. You have to use a staged migration. So that's something which you should be aware of. That is, if you already ran a directory synchronization before the cutover migration, the migration is going to fail. All right. So the dersync is not involved here. If you're doing a cutover migration, you really do not have a dersync. So this is something which you should actually have in mind. When you have a small organization, zero overhead. You use cutover migration, and if the mailboxes are very less, you don't need dersync, you don't need ADFS, you don't need most of the things. I mean, ADFS is not anywhere required for hybrid, but you can actually use a simple cutover migrations whenever you have mailboxes that are less than 1,000. All right, and make sure that the dersync is not done earlier than the cutover migration. If done, then the mailbox migration will fail. Okay, the other part is going to be the staged migration. There's no big difference between that and the other one, staged. It is going to be, you're going to migrate in batches. You're not going to migrate everything in one shot. Okay, the same story applies here. Staged migration only if it is a 2003 or a 7. Okay, if you're running an older version, it's the same rule applies here. You have to use an IMAP or a third-party solution. All right. And you should. There is one thing. If you're using or if you're running Exchange 2010, then you're going to actually implement a hybrid deployment and use MRS or mailbox move request. Okay. So staged. This is a part. If you look at the cutover migration, it says you should not use dersync. But if you see here, you should make sure that you have a dersync in place. So staged Exchange migration requires directory synchronization. Okay, and this is one more thing is if you're planning to migrate on a longer term basis, like you're not going to actually complete the migration soon, then you should probably go forward and put up a single sign-on thing so that things will be more easier for you to manage. Like you have less work to do with the user management point of view. Okay. Again, that is actually just a recommendation that can decrease the workload that you have. All right. And the other thing is IMAP email migration. Okay, that's something that you can actually, whenever you want to migrate from a non-Microsoft mail server or any mail server that is running earlier than 2003, like a 2000 Exchange 5.5, you make sure that you need to have Exchange 5.5 SP4, or else you have any sort of IMAP server, like you have your mails that is hosted on Gmail and you want to migrate. Yes, that is something that you can use. Okay. There is one more thing which you probably want to consider when you are trying to migrate is a PST capture, because there is possibilities that your organization will contain a lot of PSTs running on the network. A lot of PSTs scattered across the network. So you can use the PST capture tool to actually take these PSTs, and then if you want to convert that into a, put them off to a cloud. All right, you probably can take it off and import that to cloud. So this is something which you should understand is PST capture is not a tool that is that can be used just for cloud. It is something that you can use even within your if you have an on-premises migration, and you can use this to import your PST files basically. So it's a tool that is quite a lot useful when you want to discover the PSTs that is there in the network. And that's a download that you get from the Microsoft site, so you can download it and then use it if you. I think there are a few limitations that is available in the download, like the item limits. If you need more than the items that it supports, you need to purchase the PST Capture from the company that makes it. I think it's not a Microsoft product, first of all, but it's available in the Microsoft download. All right, simple as that. So, what are the third-party solutions that are available apart from these? You have binary tree. I think binary tree is something which is quite commonly used if you're trying to do a Lotus Notes to Exchange migration. You have BitTitan, you have Chemophore, you have Quest, you have MetaLogic, you have MigrationWiz. These are all required when you're having a specific requirement. Like say if you're trying to do a Lotus Notes to Exchange migrations, you probably can use a Quest or a binary tree. And if you're trying to do a Gmail to Exchange, then yeah, definitely you can use a migration wizard. So I'm not just saying that these tools are just used for those. And to know best about these, I would suggest you to go through the documentations made by the respective company. But these are the third-party solutions that you can actually look for if you want to actually migrate over to cloud. And they are not just going to be for a non-exchange mailbox migration. They even do exchange migrations as well. If you are actually not willing to do these using the existing tools, you can go with the third-party solution. All right. Okay, so that's the end of the part one. So what did I see today? Let me actually, before even coming to the questions, let me actually get back to the agenda and come across the things which we discussed today. All right, just a moment. Okay. As we discussed the deployment options, we actually discussed about what do we need to know when we are trying to prepare for deploying an Office 365 or Exchange Online. And we talked about the Microsoft Online Services Directory Synchronization tool. We gave an overview of that. And we talked about mail routing. We talked specifically about the target address. Then we talked about multiple options or methods that you should be familiar with when you're trying to do a migration. And this is just an introduction. We should have a better understanding on these in the upcoming parts, wherein we will be discussing more about the DIRSing, we'll be discussing more about the mail routing, and we can discuss more about the mailbox migration tools and the methods that we have. And the third-party solutions will not be in the scope of the discussion, but definitely I mentioned it here so that you should be aware that there is a third-party solutions as well available. Probably that's something that you probably can discover yourself and see which is the best method. Either use the migration methods that are available, or else go with the third-party solution. And whenever we are talking about migrations, we will be moving through the reporting options, because that is something which is really necessary whenever you're trying to migrate something. You need to make sure that you have a proper reporting in place for the mailboxes that are migrated. So those things are all something that will be discussed whenever we are talking more about the migration. So I want to actually ask you a few things, like, this is the end of the part one, to give you an introduction to what is Office 365 migration, or an Exchange Online migration going to be like. Whatever questions that you have, you can shoot me up, and if it is actually more or less specific to migration, then I would definitely say that we're going to have this in detail in the later on parts, whenever we're going to have more detailed update on the different migration options. Okay, Satya, have something to ask? I think probably. Oh yeah, definitely. I can help you with the document for that. Just a moment. This is all that you want to know. That's it. You can go through that. You can probably get to know what are the commands that are available with the Office 365 migrations. And whenever we are talking about the migrations in details, we will be going through a lot of commands that are listed there. Not necessarily every commands, but definitely most of the commands that we should be familiar with. So we will be going through there. Right, so I think it's time to thank everyone who joined today for the session, and then we will definitely have more sessions coming forward on the more detailed part of these migrations in the upcoming parts, and looking forward for your participation. And whatever feedback that you have, you can either put it on the Facebook update that I would give, or else I would be making these details in the blog. And whenever it's not just the feedback, if you have any questions that is arised based on the Office 365 or the migrations, you can put it across there. And the way to reach to my blog is www.road2master.ms. All right, thanks a lot again.